Welcome back to The Right Idea. And of course, we are here at the TFRW conference, and we're just grabbing people and putting them on in front of the camera. And right here with us now is Congressman Moran of the 1st District here in Texas. Congressman Moran, welcome to The Right Idea.
Thanks. Great to be with you guys today. And thanks so much to TPPF for what they do to stand for liberty and for the conservative values that are so critical, not just to Texas and the United States, but to the world.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much for that great compliment. So what are you hearing, from your constituents? What are you hearing from the folks here? What are the big issues that you're working on right now that are tops in Texas?
Well, right now we're in a shutdown. So I know everybody knows we're in a shutdown
right
now. If they don't know it, I know. But here's what I'm hearing from my constituents about that in particular is they're saying stand your ground. Mm-hmm. They recognize that there's so much on the line long term as we talk about the policies that the Democrats are holding the American hostage for. Mm-hmm. And they're saying, hey, we've got to have these things or we're not going to reopen government. We're not going to let government do the things that it needs to do and should do. We can't give into that because long term, the taxpayer is going to pay a horrible price for those policies. So conservatives need to dig in and say, listen, we may feel a little pain on the short hand of this, but we've got to stand firm in our long-term principles. Otherwise, we're going to dig ourselves a bigger hole.
That's right. But giving into the hostage demands, Derek.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, hey, the fact that the Democrats are out there calling for less government, broken clock being right twice a day, I suppose. One of the things I did want to ask you, though, with the shutdown, is I think that, and obviously this is a political statement, but I think Speaker Johnson has played this quite well. And I think that at the very least, his position on, no, we're not going to reauthorize COVID-era Obamacare subsidies just in order to keep the government going. It seems like almost like a no-brainer. Let me ask you, though, what is your experience with Speaker Johnson? Because I know he kind of came from, I don't want to say obscurity, but, people knew who he was, but no one had him in the speaker conversation, and here we are.
Yeah, I think the world of Speaker Johnson. My district touches his. So Northeast Texas, the 1st District of Texas, goes over to Arkansas and Louisiana border. Mm-hmm. So he and I were close even before he became Speaker because we share a lot of the same business entities on each side of the border and our people work in each other's district. You're not going to find a better man than Speaker Mike Johnson. He's authentic. He's principled. He's always been underestimated. And I think that's really helped him out quite a bit. When he first came in, there were several people on the Republican side that just didn't think he could get the job done. And time again, he proves them wrong because he's trusted. And when you're a trusted voice in Washington, D.C., and people realize that you're not there for the power of the position, which he is not, you're there for the principles, then they begin to line up behind you and say, oh, yeah, he really is here to do what's best for the American people. And I think he's done a great job, particularly in this shutdown, because the daily press conferences, you see him, he gets in a great rhythm. It looks like he's back as a lawyer giving his closing arguments, and that's where he feels comfortable. Mm-hmm. And he's done a really great job of managing that communication and making sure that the public understands, look, the Republicans did our job. We passed something September 19th that would fully fund the government. We can talk about these other issues that we know are important issues to everybody on both sides of the aisle. Yeah, but you can't you can't attach all that in the kitchen sink to a 7-week CR bill, and that's what the Democrats have tried to do. Because of Speaker Johnson's leadership, I think the American public are beginning to turn on the Democrats and say, actually, these guys are right.
And speaking of which, the CR is going to be, it's the one they're fighting for right now is a short-term CR to get just through November 21st. So what's the longer play? What's the strategy to fund the government? Is it through the election next year, or what are y'all talking about?
Well, what we need to do is go back to where we left off in September, mid-September. We had 3 of the 12 regular appropriations bills passed through the House, also passed through the Senate, that were being negotiated by a conference. By the way, we haven't seen a formal conference in Congress in more than 2 decades. Speaker Johnson brought that back. Yeah. Normally, it's just the 4 corners, the leaders that are deciding things, but Speaker Johnson's trying to bring it from ground up again. Those 3 of the 12 bills actually represent about 65 or 70% of the discretionary spending of those 12 bills. Mm-hmm. The Senate and the House were close to reaching a deal on that. We need to get back to that point, finish that out, and then finish the other 9 bills, which are the more minor bills. But we have to all remember that most of the spending that happens in the federal government actually happens irregardless of the annual appropriations bills, because it's the 70 to 75% of spending that's mandatory that just continues without regard to whether or not we're in a quote, shut down or not.
Now, when I was back in Congress, I used to work for Senator Mike Lee, and that was always one thing that we were continuing or trying to push for is getting back to doing separate appropriations bills. I mean, you talked about the 3 of the 12. I haven't heard that in a decade or
That's
more.
right.
It's always been continuing resolutions or omnibus or cromnibus or whatever they're doing. Getting back to that, talk about why that is so important, doing those individual spending bills.
Yeah, because you get greater transparency with the individual spending bills. And so when you break them down, you really understand what's in each one of them. And that's important. As you know, transparency breeds accountability. When you hide all of it into a large omnibus bill, too many deals can get made in a way that undermines the overall goal. And then you end up having a lot of stuff in there that you don't like, but
Right.
Overall, you're like, well, I need to vote for the appropriations to move forward, but there's a lot of things attached you don't like at all.
And that's where you get some of the bad spending because then
That's
it's
right.
either shut down the government or vote for all of it or whatever. What has been the biggest change? What's been the biggest? I have kind of 2 questions rolling around my head. Number one, what's been the biggest change from the first Trump administration to the second Trump administration? I'm kind of interested to know what the dynamic is there. But even just the biggest change in the last 9 months or 10 months since Trump's been in charge. And
Number one change from 45 to 47 is this, that I think at 45, President Trump listened to too many people on the outside about how things should happen. He was a little tentative, wasn't quite sure about how government on the inside actually worked. And when every position I've ever held, city council or county judge, wherever I was doing something, we all know it takes a little time to understand how the machine works. That was effectively the first term for President Trump. By the time he figured out how it was working, he understood that people were thwarting his ultimate goals.
the deep state.
Yeah, even on the same side of the aisle. Coming into the 47th, he said, oh, I know where I want to go, and I know what people I need around me to accomplish those goals. And as a result, the preparation leading up to his inauguration led to the magnificent results we've seen just in the first 9 or 10 months of his presidency.
And what do you think has been the biggest accomplishment between now and the beginning of the year?
I'm going to name 2 in particular. One is the border.
Yeah.
I
I should have said your biggest accomplishment, and you can't say the border.
Oh yeah, I know.
Especially
You have to
Texas.
start with the border because President Biden was so weak on that. Our sovereignty and our security were given away for 4 years. Now President Trump almost and within weeks restored the sovereignty and the strength and the security of America. And the strength of America on the world stage has done, I think, great things for a number of nations, our allies and our partners around the world. Yeah. People are coming to the table realizing we're not going to get pushed around anymore. And that's been really important. Now, the second big accomplishment I think he's done is the One Big Beautiful Bill, now called the Working Families Tax Cut. I'm on the Ways and Means Committee, so was privileged to be one of 26 Republicans that effectively had a conclave for months and months and months to try to figure out how do we write the tax portion, because we understood, and I clearly communicate all over my district all the time, look, the lower your taxes are, the higher your liberty is. If you're a family, a farmer, or a business, it doesn't matter. You need to keep more of your hard-earned money. The government doesn't need it. And the more we can give back to you, the more liberty you have in your own life to decide what you want to do with it. What we've also discovered is people really don't want that spending that's coming to them from the federal government to go away. That's what's going to make getting it back to fiscal sanity harder, because everybody is touched now by the federal government, because federal government is in too much of our lives and spends too much that impacts us. We all have to be willing to say, you know what, you're right, give it back to me. Let me decide what I want to do with my money and where I want to spend it and how I want to spend it. And federal government, I'll take care of myself. It's about responsibility and independence and that liberty, and you'll never get it if government's in charge of things.
Yep.
Well, I think one of the things that you've talked about quite frequently, and I think is another very stark contrast between the Obama Freudian slip
Same
there.
thing, same
yeah,
thing.
exactly. The Biden administration and the Trump administration is the way he would not only treat the border, but hostile actors on the border. I'm thinking specifically the cartels. One of the things that we saw coming out of in those first 10 months was designating these cartels as terrorist organizations. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and how the importance of having that designation in place is?
Yeah. Dan Crenshaw has been on top of this for many, many years. So I'm going to give Dan credit for this, because he's been a great microphone to say we need to designate the cartels as terrorists. They are.
Absolutely.
They are They are an adversarial entity, an organization that wants to undermine Americans left and right. They're the ones that are ushering in human trafficking and drug trafficking, and we can count up the tens of thousands of deaths each year that are related to the activities they're doing, and it's a direct assault on America. So I'm so glad to see President Trump do that. I think we need to codify that. We need to get it statutorily put in place so that we have the ability to hit at what's most important to the cartels. And what they value most is their lives and their money. And right now you're seeing their lives in peril.
Wild, just blowing them out of the sea. That's amazing.
And do you realize now that we've done that just a few times, how much it's decreased that sea journey to bring drugs into the United States? Now consider what would happen if we begin to go after some of those cartels on land. And I know it's a little bit more difficult proposition, but frankly, the terrorist designation opens it up to us being able to do that. It's not a war, it's a strategic strike, kind of like what we did with Iran. And I'd like to see some of that happen, because immediately those heads of cartels will say, you know what? I don't think it's worth it. I think I'm done. I'm out.
Imposing an operational overhead.
That's right.
Is Mexico an ally? Are they a partner? Are they the opposite of whatever that is? Where do you stand on that? Because especially with Texas being right there, where do you stand on our relationship with Mexico and where they fall in all this?
It's the relationship status. It's complicated. That's the relationship status, I think, between the U.S. and Mexico.
Yeah, that's about right.
Look, they've come to the table on a number of things. They are a valuable economic partner. When you look at Mexico and Canada and the United States together, us being able to have economic ties together is critically important. We want Mexico to develop their internal economy so that it gets away from a cartel-driven economy, so that their folks have choices on what they can do to provide food and clothing and shelter for their families, instead of trying to make their way up to the United States or allow others to make their way up through Mexico to the United States. We want them to thrive. The more they thrive, the more Canada thrives, the better it is for all of us here in North America. But we have to put America first. We absolutely have to. And we can't bend to the pressure to do what's right as it relates to the cartels. And right now, that's the one key aspect that the Mexican government certainly is, I think, still a little hesitant to dig into. They don't want to push back against those cartels because of the power and the money that they have.
I'll give you a couple of rapid fire issues real quick. Tariffs, it looks like, all of the naysayers are probably, or at least none of that's come to pass in terms of the tariffs. But back home, back in your district, are you hearing from people? Are they worried about the stage of the economy, and how are the tariffs playing back in your district?
Yeah, it's tough. I think what my folks back home have said really is a reflection of the viewpoint that I have, and that is, long term, we want tariffs as low as possible for as many of the allied countries that we're with, because that tariff is a tax. Ultimately, the consumer is going to pay a higher price for it. But on the short end, it has done a great job using as leverage to bring other countries to the table, even allied countries to the table, to renegotiate the deals that were first put in place back in post-World War II, when we needed other countries to have the ability to grow their economy. And we needed to give them some preference on some things. But now it's different. Now we need to reshape it so it's more fair, more reciprocal. You see it from Europe, you see it from India, Japan, the countries that are willing to come to the table. Vietnam, they're willing to come to the table and say, you're right, we've been screwing up America over on a bunch of ways, and we'll make it more reciprocal. Long term, that's going to be great. Now, for our adversaries like China, boy, we need to hammer them. We need to continue to put the pressure on them using tariffs, because they are undercutting our businesses. They don't impose safety regulations on their businesses. They will subsidize their businesses. They will undercut our monetary currency. They will drive our businesses out of business, and then they come in and dominate the market, and then we're captive to them. We don't need to see that happen. So we want to hammer them until they start playing fair.
Speaking of China, before we come off that issue, I know you've been very outspoken on the recent move to ensure their own stockpile of critical minerals. And that's been something that's obviously had a lot of implications for national security and defense. With that, I mean, how do you see that particular issue progressing?
Most people don't realize 98% of the heavy rare earth minerals actually come from or are controlled by China in some way. And so that's a problem for us. That's a real problem for us. And China is going to use that as leverage, and they already have in the past month with export controls as it relates to critical minerals that the United States needs. we've got to find a way to build up our critical mineral supply chain and our rare earth minerals here in the United States. That means we got to open up mining more here. We've got some opportunities, but we also need to find more partnerships in Africa and in South America and across the world where those minerals exist, so that those countries become beholden to us economically. It's the soft power of economics. It will drive the foreign policy of those nations and their military policies. We don't want China going in there with sweetened deals to make them captive to Chinese Communist Party. We want them captive to us. So we need to be able to have those ties around the world and show strength on the world stage so that we have that supply chain unfettered and uninterrupted by the CCP.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about, multilateral negotiations and deal making, it's hard to find somebody better at that one particular, checking that one particular box than President Trump. Obviously the Abraham Accords, I think it's just one example of that particular phenomenon.
I want to jump into healthcare. The Democrats are trying to make the shutdown fight all about healthcare, so I'm sure you probably get asked. Sure, reporters are asking you because they were, parroting the Democrat line on that stuff. New poll comes out last week. AP poll says 60% of Americans are concerned about rising healthcare costs. Thank you, Obamacare. Rising health insurance premiums, and unfortunately, a plurality of Americans say we should go ahead and fund those new subsidies. Yeah. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so we shouldn't. We've got to stand strong on letting these COVID era ACA subsidies expire at the end of 2025, which is, remember, it was a Democratic program put in place by the Democrats during COVID, only for a 5-year period of time. It was supposed to be temporary, but you guys know the old adage, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program, right?
That's right.
And so now that the Democrats' own program that they voted for during COVID as a COVID era program is coming to a conclusion as they determined, now they're all freaked out. The problem is, I think we need to do a better job with messaging. People need to understand that healthcare premiums have gone through the roof in the past 4 or 5 years, in part because we're subsidizing it. And so who's the winner? It's not the consumer. It's the health insurance companies. They have record profits over the past 4 or 5 years. So if we continue to subsidize the ACA program with the enhanced subsidies, again, we're not getting rid of the original subsidies. It's just the enhanced COVID era subsidies that are going away. The only folks that are going to lose in that at the end of the day is the health insurance companies. They've got to bring the premiums down. They absolutely have to. But the marketplace would do that if we let the marketplace work. What we're unfortunately moving towards is what Obamacare, I think, probably wanted to see, and that is single-payer government system. Yeah. And we don't want that. That's going to be shortage of health care. That's going to be increased prices. That's right. It's going to be rationing. It's not what we want.
So lack of a market drives everybody into the government program because on the private market, you can't afford it. Then they start subsidizing once you get onto the government program. Insurance premiums goes up, more subsidies, and it just goes around and around, and everybody's trapped on the
It's a vicious cycle. And here's a statistic most people don't know. 40% of the fully subsidized individuals on an ACA program didn't go to the doctor one time last year. Not one claim. So here we are subsidizing health insurance premiums for the benefit of the health insurance companies that never had to pay out one claim. Wow. Because 40% of the people fully subsidized never went to see their doctor.
One last rapid fire subject, just because the CPPF, we have to talk about education. Texas passed its school choice program this year in our state legislature. It will be the largest day one school choice program in the history of school choice, in the history of this country. Your thoughts on that? I know it's not a federal issue, but poor Secretary McMahon, she's trying as best she can to shut down the department, but they keep giving her work to do.
Let her retire.
Yeah. What are your constituents saying about the importance of education, and are they supportive of the school choice program?
Yeah, my folks agree with me that parents need to, and they do have the constitutional right to direct the upbringing and the education of their kiddos. That goes back to a 1906 Supreme Court case, and it should still be the law of the land today. I know we've got a great constitutional amendment on the ballot that's going on right now in the state of Texas to basically reaffirm that. But that's very important for us. When I came into Congress, liquidating the Department of Education was at the top of my list of things I wanted to do. I was on the Education Workforce Committee the first term, and for the first 18 months, we looked at every program that was a programmatic tie between the federal government and local school districts, because we think it's a state's issue. Constitutionally, it's reserved for the states. Right. States and local entities and through families need to make decisions about the education locally. Federal government ought to be out of it. They shouldn't be in it. So we said, you know what, we don't want to just file a bill that says get rid of the Department of Education, because at the end of the day, you need to cut the programmatic and the financial ties. That's really what will make the difference. Right. And so we identified all those programmatic and financial ties. And here, this at the beginning of this session, we filed our bill that's called the orderly liquidation of the Department of Education. We want to do it in a way that it winds it down so that states can pick up where the federal government has been before, so that school districts from one year to the next don't lose all their funding from the federal government overnight, because they need a chance to replace that funding that's coming. But we need to wind it down. We need to separate the federal government out of the business of education. It is not our business. Only parents with their elected school boards or their charter or private or homeschool coalitions, whatever they're involved with, all of it works out great as long as parents have the choice, parents have the lead, and parents get to dictate it.
Now, I know before we come off the topic of education, it's a great segue on this. You know, I think that there's also a realization, specifically post-COVID, but I think actually extending long before, where you start seeing that like the traditional education model just isn't for every kid. You know,
that's right.
Getting every kid into college, you know, college for all, as I would say, just is not the way to do things, because you're actually taking people that would have very, very promising careers in, more labor-oriented fields. You're taking them out of their workforce, and you're actually probably keeping them from a larger paycheck in many ways. Not that being a barista with a gender studies degree at Starbucks is, necessarily a dead-end job. But
not to mention the debt they incur when they go to
that's right, and that's the thumb on the scale. So I know you've been active in this area, specifically on the topic of apprenticeships. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. We've got a bill. We think apprenticeships are critically important, and you're right, not every kid needs to go to college. I have 4 kids, 2 are college age. One is going to a traditional college route, and she's getting an engineering degree. My son is going a different route, and he's already working in the workplace. And we're working towards certifications and skills that will last him a lifetime. And both are on the right path for them. Every child is different, and you need to have that path. But we think apprenticeships is one of the very important keys for businesses to be able to take kids in that maybe haven't got a 2 or 4 year degree and to train them in some great skill that they're not going to learn anywhere else except for in the workplace. So this apprenticeship bill will help to cut the tax bill related to the payroll taxes for the mentor or the mentee.
Fantastic.
We're working with the Senate, and we're working across the aisle. We think that we can make it bipartisan and bicameral, and to push it through Congress to say, this makes sense for everybody. So whether or not your child is going to college or not, the apprenticeship should be there, but it's costly for businesses to do that. Yeah. Again, we want to just give them more of their money back. It's their money, so hard work money. Give that money back to that business and say, why don't you use that money how you see fit, not how we see fit.
Let me ask you, before we come off that issue, because that's a fantastic summary. You mentioned bipartisanship on this. What is the pushback? This seems like the most common sense bill of all. Well, a lot of the bills that you have served seem like a common sense bill, or the most common sense bill of all time. What's the pushback on this?
Well, so far, not a huge amount of pushback, except that it does decrease the revenue to the federal government. I mean, ultimately, you're taking tax money, payroll tax money that would otherwise go to the federal government to stay in that business. And you'd be surprised. Some people actually want to see that go to the federal government.
I would not be surprised.
Bernie Sanders hates this bill.
I know.